I'm Ed Rabyd, otherwise known as the Rabyd Atheist, a former pastor turned atheist, now a compassionate anti-theist. Welcome to my channel. Feel free to like or dislike the video as you see fit, so feel free to hit those buttons. Feel free to comment below, and I would appreciate it if you would subscribe to the channel and hit your notification bell for more content as it is released. The purpose of this channel is educational in regards to atheist and deconversion issues and politics, Bible, theology, philosophy, and relationship to those issues as it comes up. Today is one of those issues where I'm kind of delving into the part of my past. It's a part of my past that's farther back than my more moderate Christian days, but I grew up in a Pentecostal household. I grew up in the Assemblies of God. My earliest memories are Assemblies of God beginner class in my church. I grew up in that Sunday school environment, never missed, and it was all a Pentecostal thing. Now, people ask me, what is the appeal of Pentecostalism? Why do people go to it? Because it seems a little extreme, because you really, really believe, and the prime is really pumped, that the Holy Spirit is going to do miraculous things. And so you have a tendency, I think Pentecostals have a very big tendency to see everything as a miracle, that all things are miracles. I can't deny what I see, and say, yeah, but you've been primed to see that through a certain lens. And my time as a Pentecostal, as a Christian, I kind of shrugged it off, both biblically and otherwise, because I looked at the Bible and said, well, the whole initial physical evidence thing of speaking in tongues doesn't really fly biblically completely. It's kind of a debatable point. And because it's a debatable point, I don't think you should have a doctrinal statement that says you have to be this or you're just not part of the crew. I watched a lot of people have to walk away from their community because they just didn't believe certain nuances of the Pentecostal faith. And in my opinion, at first, that's why a lot of Pentecostal churches were shrinking at the time. Now I think it's just it's that, and the whole faith is coming under the scrutiny of actual information. But my time as Pentecostal, I can break down to the fact that because I grew up in it, it really has probably more of an effect on my opinion of faith and why I'm an anti-theist than my moderate days. My moderate church that I pastored for the last 9.5 years, which had a taint of conservatism because of the people that were attending, but I had liberals and Democrats and Republicans, every kind of person attending that church. I often called my church the Isle of Misfit Toys, because when you really looked at it, there was just a bunch of people there that would not have fit in a lot of the other mainstream or even Pentecostal denominations or side fundamentalist denominations. So they came there. And I played that pretty good as a pastor, and I made sure that everybody felt accepted. So I wasn't into saying disfellowshipping somebody simply because they believed differently. Like I said, that church had a very simple, basic doctrinal statement. But my Pentecostal days, of course, I had the Assemblies of God, their 16 fundamental truths, which are very detailed and very difficult, and you have to believe all of them as an Assembly of God minister, and there's not a lot of wiggle room. And it's that kind of indoctrination that I find a little bit heavy-handed. Now, I'm going to tell you right now that indoctrination doesn't have to be done with fear. It can be done with what a lot of cultist people call love bombing, where you just get constantly accepted for believing what everybody else believes. And that's a lot of what happens in Pentecostalism, although I think the hellfire and brimstone preaching very much exists too for those that are more motivated by fear. So my time as a Pentecostal, what I learned is miracles can be faked, and they can be easily faked. Okay? It's not hard to convince people that what they just saw is a miracle. If you indoctrinate people into thinking that God through the Holy Spirit is going to constantly do stuff, okay, then it becomes very easy to shift that expectation to see what happened to that guy over there. He just fell down in the Spirit. he's got back up and he says he's healed. The Holy Spirit did that. I would now look at it and say, no, he was emotionally manipulated to expect to fall down under the being slain in the spirit, which is what we used to call it. And he's been, conditioned to expect that sort of thing. So when the evangelist touched his forehead, he fell over because he expected that. He had already emotionally primed himself for that. He gets up, feels real euphoric. And because he feels euphoric, he claims he's been healed, but he's still got cancer. And if he goes to a doctor and he gets examined, he's still got cancer. And that's usually what happened. A week later, they say, I still got cancer. I don't know what happened to the healing of God. No, you never got healed in the first place. And that's the kind of thing that you would see on a daily basis in Pentecostal circles. I fully knew well, for instance, that some of the evangelists that I had to visit my church had earpieces. I could see them. And I'm like, well, that's not ours. Okay, we gave them the microphone. But where'd the earpiece come from? And this is, early 2000s. So this kind of technology was, available in the 80s. I mean, Popoff got caught by James Randi in the 80s, so that technology had simply become more miniaturized and easier to use. And a lot of Pentecostal evangelist type preachers have earpieces. And that's because they're being fed information. They're not really doing a cold reading. They're doing a hot reading. They already know the information. And it's being piped into the air, and the people in the audience gave it to them. Because the expectation is that something's going to happen. God's going to speak to us. If you pound that into people's heads from the time they're little until they're adults, they're going to continue to expect it. Now, there's another type of people that came in that maybe didn't grow up in the church that, also came in. And it's the people that are truly desperate because nothing in the real world is going to work. I lost track of the number of people that are facing very difficult real world, significant issues that came into the Pentecostal church because they were running out of options. I mean, either the doctors or the bankers or somebody told them, hey, we can't help. Okay. And they run to the church and they, God's going to deliver me. Now, here's what usually happens. In the case of, doctoral amen, what the doctor's already told them is, hey, you got 4 or 5 years. Okay. So it's not critical. And often the doctor has also told them if you make some changes in your diet and stuff, you could extend that out or something. That's usually most of the time what had happened. And then these people would say, I've been healed, and live another 4 or 5 years claiming they've been healed, but then they die. And it's exactly what the doctor told them. I lost track of the number. I literally, the prime the pump thing and the expectation thing has a real serious psychological effect. One of the women in one of the churches that I was part of literally convinced herself that she was pregnant, to the point that she actually stopped menstruating. She developed a belly, that looked like pregnancy belly, not fat. She had all the psychosomatic symptoms of being pregnant. And then the day of delivery came and went, and nothing happened. And it became pretty clear that she had convinced herself that, God had made her pregnant. And now when it came to the moment of truth, there's no baby. So, and that became a very traumatic experience for her, the church, everybody. And they explained it away, God just took the baby. No, there was no baby to begin with. And that's the thing about Pentecostalism that can be very, very devastating to people, is the expectations by God are high. God still does miracles. God still causes people to talk in tongues and prophesy. And it creates a real bad atmosphere of expectation. But the other part is the authoritative control. You don't need denominational and doctrinal practices to get control over your congregation. Just figure out how to appear to be the most spiritual person in the room, and you will definitely take control of that church. My largest problem in my 2 Pentecostal churches that I pastored is that I was not perceived as the most spiritual person in the room. And because of that, I had less authority than somebody else. That was the case in both of my Pentecostal churches that I pastored. You have to really fight, for your authority as a pastor in a Pentecostal church. And the best way to do that is, prime the pump, keep everybody's expectations high, pray for people, watch them fall down. Just keep that whole emotional expectation. The pastors that do that usually don't have a problem with people following them. I didn't do that. And so my problem was not being perceived as the most spiritual person in the church. I constantly was running into people opposing my ideas and things like that. And it's a phenomenon that's common in, I think, every Pentecostal church I've ever been a part of. I won't say there won't be exceptions to that rule, but what I learned is how you don't have to necessarily have the authority of an office to have pretty supreme authority over the church. Other places, have different ways that control is measured out. Like in my last church, all a person had to do to control the church was hold a certain office. It had all the trappings of a congregational church having democracy and everything else. But when you really looked at the way it was structured, well, the person who controls the agenda controls the church. And there was only one person that was elected to do that. And it didn't matter who held that office. That person was going to control what got voted on, how it was going to be voted on, controlled the council meetings, led the council meetings. When you really look at the amount of power that was given to that individual is the person running the church, not the pastor, not anybody else. In Pentecostal circles, this could be anybody. You could literally have any sociopath walk in, and as long as they pretended to be more spiritual than everybody else, and everybody looked to them as spiritual, you could see them being in control. And that had a tremendous possibility for abuse, and often was abused. Pastors might go to Bible college and discuss the ethics of how far they should go in the ministry. A lay person doesn't even often think about that sort of thing. They just say, I'm spiritual. This is what I think is right. And everybody jumps on board because they are perceived to be the most spiritual person in the room, simply because they speak in tongues more than everybody else, they prophesy more than everybody else, or they fall down in the spirit more than everybody else. They seem to be the most in touch with God. Now, as an atheist, I realize a lot of that's complete and utter psychological manipulation bullshit. And it really pisses me off now when I see it, because I know what it is from firsthand knowledge. I saw a lot of abuse take place. A lot of the affairs that ministers have in Pentecostal churches is simply the guy or gal, in a couple of cases, is a pastor who really takes this spiritual route. And so they have the authority of the office, and they're the most spiritual. And so they're the most in touch with God. So when they start getting involved with somebody, they can spiritualize it as, I'm the prophet, so this is okay. I'm the person that's most spiritual, so this is okay. God's giving me special permission to violate his word. Literally, that's what I heard one guy say, because of such and such. And what that leads to then is, they can bang and screw whoever they want to, or they can get money out of whoever they want to. And Jim Jones did this in spades. He had a very Pentecostal, charismatic type ministry, and he got all the sex that he wanted, and he got all the money that he wanted. He literally had everybody giving him all their money, and then he would, here's your food, here's your place to stay, and it was like, I'm saving you from poverty. That kind of manipulative control. And then every woman in the place, if Jim Jones approached them, they would have sex with him. Okay, there were very few exceptions. And that's kind of just the way it went. That's the kind of power Pentecostal, that's an extreme example, but I'm using it to help you understand that not all examples of control and manipulation in the Pentecostal church that I saw were that extreme. You could have simple manipulation where people I knew pastors that were perceived as spiritual, so they never hardly had to pay for food. They never had to hardly pay for anything. Okay. And, they still got a salary and, things like that. But I noticed that most churches that were successful, it had to do with one of two things. Either the pastor was really organized and had a real corporate organizational structure with him as the CEO at the top, or they had this spiritual moniker of being the prophet of the church. And it's those two types of people that often got in charge. And why do I say all this as an atheist? I want you to understand that people will be, if they're conditioned properly, will believe anything. Speaking in tongues is actually a learned behavior. I now believe that more than anything else. You watch other people do it, and eventually it's your turn, and you do something, and you say something that's weird. And all of a sudden that's interpreted as tongues. Getting people to believe that miracles happen isn't all that hard. I saw literally the trick a couple of times where the evangelist runs up and down the aisle, grabs somebody's walker or cane, holds it up, okay, and points to somebody else who the walker or cane does not even belong to, and tells him to get up and run up and down the aisle. The perceived thing is that guy just got healed. Now, it's not even the person who that shit belongs to. It's a fully healthy guy that can walk, okay, running up and down the aisle that didn't have a problem in the first place. I saw that at more than one, special evangelist meeting, the earpiece thing where they're being fed information. And a lot of these people that are quote unquote prophetic ministry, it's cold reading. It's just straight up psychic cold reading. They just repackage it as as a Christian thing. But it's the same thing. And I used to see this all the time. And you ask yourself, how can people be fooled? Well, they want to be. If you're in a desperate situation where you don't have any other options, you run to anything. And it just so happens that some people fall into Pentecostalism. Now, those growing up in Pentecostalism are conditioned to expect and trained to see what they see through a different lens. And it's God working, not necessarily just the normal mechanizations of life. And this is the problem, and I want to kind of, for the comment of the week, I want this one to kind of go along with this, but Turk Powers pointed out to me that his life and my life are very similar. And it's one of the things I want to talk about, what Pentecostalism does to your mind, because it's true of a lot of religion. Okay. I asked the question, do you still find yourself falling into certain patterns of thinking, or you catch yourself and say, oh man, this is my religious way of thinking? And Turk gave me this example, and I think it speaks so well to Pentecostalism, what they do to you. Is you either something is spiritual or not. It's the black and white thinking. But here's his response, Turk's response. To answer your question, what are some thoughts or ideas that with me from my days as a holy roller on through to the vial of apostasy? Black and white thinking. Either something is good or it is evil. It's up or down. You are either going to heaven or you're going to hell. There's no place for gray, neutral, in between, or purgatory. It had to be either or. Recognizing this has helped me out a lot. Realizing life isn't always black and white. Sometimes there isn't an answer. Sometimes the either or won't even provide the correct choice to the equation. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. I still catch myself now and then in black and white mindsets, though my black and white thinking has become far less. My black and white thinking crayon box has been diversified. Now it has about 8 different colors in it. Hopefully one day I will be one of the cool kids who has the 64 color crayon box. That is a great analogy. I think that's one of the best analogies I've had. And this is the comment of the video from previously this week from comments. And I think that's absolutely true. But I'm going to add one. Either it's spiritual or it's not spiritual from a Pentecostal vein. I also heard that's man's ways or God's ways. The real thing that religious thinking in general, I think, but it's more in spades and more fundamentalist, this is the way it is, when it comes to God denominations, but you create a lot of false dichotomies. You don't realize that, shit, there's like 400 different options here. I agree. I want to get that crayon box that has 64, colors in it, and color it the right color. This is why I don't like, in politics, I don't like the right-left dichotomy, because I think it's a false dichotomy. That's why I don't like the moderate position either, because you're basing your moderate position on a false dichotomy when there could be tons of other explanations. I don't think, given 330 million people in the United States, that we actually fall into one or two camps. I think that's a load of shit. In reality, if you sit down and talk with Americans, they have a multitude of opinions. The same is true in religion, though. The issue with Pentecostalism and other fundamentalism is it gets you into this black and white mode of thinking. And it's hard to get out of it. He's right. It's a deconversion issue, because you continue to create false dichotomies. You've been trained in your mind to create these dichotomies. And when you realize, well, shit, that may not even be the only two answers. Maybe there isn't an answer. There's a tough one. The biggest tough one I had coming out of Pentecostalism, even before I became an atheist, was, holy shit, I really think in terms of black and white terms here of, this is right or wrong, this is spiritual or non-spiritual. It's just terrible sometimes how you find yourself, creating these choices, and then you suddenly realize there's other choices. I too, I think I've got up to the 8 crayon box. I've managed to buy the small crayon box, and I'm working on being the cool kid too. Maybe I've got up to 12 or 16 by now, simply from doing this channel and doing other things. But you're right. This is the issue. This is the thing that really nails us, is because religion in general and fundamentalist and even extreme views of spirituality really train right, wrong, spiritual, non-spiritual. And that is the heart and soul of what I learned as a Pentecostal. And this is what I don't want to be anymore. I don't want to look at any issue and automatically assume that it's right, left, right or wrong. I want to look at the issue and say, what exactly does it do? And what is the truth about it? And that really changes the dichotomy. To me, the biggest thing that's religious is the false dichotomy in a lot of things. There's other big things, but that I'd put on the top 5 list, but it's definitely my top 5 list of things to watch out for in my current thinking. All right, I want to thank everybody being on board for this little discussion, and appreciate the comment, Turk. You're the comment of the day, I guess, and appreciate that. I got to deal with some of the other comments from that video in my ramble on Friday. But thanks once again for coming along, and hopefully I can convince you to be a rabid atheist like myself. In the meantime, this is Ed Rabyd, also known as the Rabid Atheist, signing off and wishing you a good day.